preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good morning, ladies. Hello? Testing, testing. Can you hear me? How's that? Is this working? All right. Okay, good morning. Good morning, ladies. As you know, this is our last lecture in this series. And in a way, I guess we can call this the living end, because this series will continue next year, and as you know, we have other series coming up in February and in March, so that you needn't feel too desolate. We have a very cooperative and helpful member of this group, Miss Rubal, who's sitting in the front row, who has arranged for the tour that Dean McKay suggested, and she's actually written out little cards as to when and where and how you're to go, so that at the end of the lecture, Miss Rubal will distribute them up here. Is that right, Miss Rubal?
Yes.
To those of you who want to go. There were about 25 people who signed up for this. So this is a tour of the detention centers, which Dean McKay was. I know it sounds grim, but it should be fascinating. Yes, anybody who wants to go may go.
It's those who have signed the paper.
Only those?
Because that's how many reservations.
Oh, I see. Only those apparently who've signed, but there may be people who don't go, so you can get on a waiting list. Right. As you know, today's speaker is theater columnist for the Village Voice. He's just returned, and I mean just, the night before last, from London, where he was busy on a new novel. Another novel of his is being published in March, called The Autograph Hound, and a book of essays entitled Astonish Me. He edited a case book on Harold Pinter's The Homecoming, and is the author of Notes on a Cowardly Lion, and I think you all know who that cowardly lion was. Bert Lahr, who was his father. He won the George Jean Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism, and a movie he co-authored was nominated for an Academy Award. The name of this movie was Sticky My Fingers, Fleet My Feet. I was intrigued by that title, and I asked him to give us a title for this morning's lecture, and he hesitated a moment, and he said, let's call it Outrageous Opinions. And that's what we're going to hear this morning from John Lahr.
Well, I hope we can agree to disagree, and I hope that it'll be a dialogue and not just a lecture, because I want to talk to you and have you talk to me, and I hope you'll want to ask questions not only about what I say to you now, but maybe about Lincoln Center, or perhaps my father, if you want to talk about that, or specific pieces of theater that I might not mention in this discussion. But I have a lot of axes to grind in the theater, and that's the function of a critic, and that's what I'm going to do. I want to start in talking about sort of contemporary theater by quoting probably the best and earliest sort of writing about America by a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, where he said, "No portion of literature is connected by closer or more numerous ties with the present condition of the society than the drama. The drama of one period can never be suited to the following age," and this is important, "if in the interval an important revolution has changed the manners and laws of a nation." Now, as I look around, as I come back to America after half a year, I think we can all agree that things are changing, and that the revolutions, some of which we fear, some of which we welcome, are are taking place in some way. I mean, monogamy is in retreat. The ghettos are exploding. We don't know, we can run down the whole list of social ills. But I think the most interesting and probably the most crucial revolution is the one that we want, or the one that we seem to live with the best, and that's the technological one. And I want to begin this talk, but with a simple fact, a fact that was raised by Nicholas Johnson, the former head of the FCC. Johnson said that the average television viewer, by that I mean between the ages of 2 and 65, that's the average lifespan of a television viewer, will spend in the course of his life 9 full years in front of a television set. Now, in beginning to talk about the theater, this is to me a very good starting point, because if I can make you realize what theater is about to me, then perhaps we can understand why it's so important for those of us who are in it to keep it going and to keep talking about it and redefining it and arguing about it. The very fact that people will spend 9 full years in front of a television set is also compounded by the cassette, because the cassette will, in a few years, allow us to absolutely eliminate whatever bad news we get from that screen. In other words, we will be forever allowed to exist in the Busby Berkeley world, or the Humphrey Bogart world, or the world of W.C. Fields. We will never have to see reality. But anyway, how many of us take a look at that for very long? I mean, the fact is that this poses a real spiritual problem to the culture, because no challenging voices need be heard, because one need not see or re-experience one's history. And what I want to argue with you today is that is the essential function of theater, and that is the essential religious experience. And it is also, I think my mother will be proud that I say this, it is the function of prayer. And it works very much in the same, prayer and the theater work very much in the same manner, in that they're reflective and they allow us to look forward and look to the past. They suspend the moment, and they allow us in the time that we are playing or praying. I mean, I like to use the terms interchangeably. They allow us to exist in a special time, in a special place, outside the reality of the real world. And I'd like to quote from a very good book called The Feast of Fools by Harvey Cox, who says, and again, keep in mind the idea of theater, we recall the past not only by recording it, but by reliving it, by making present again its fears and delectations. We anticipate the future not only by preparing for it, but by conjuring up and creating it. Our links to yesterday and tomorrow, also on the aesthetic, emotional, and symbolic aspects of human life, depend on saga, play, and celebration. Without festivity, that is theater, man would not really be a historical being at all. Now this is very important, because many of the problems that our culture is having now is precisely because the culture and the people who rule the culture have no historical memory. In the sense that we don't learn from our past, because our past is erased. We don't live it through. We don't enact it enough. We aren't surrounded with enough things that make us face it in an imaginative, symbolic way in order to really grasp it. I mean, anything that has to do with Vietnam is a perfect example. Or if we could, throughout Vietnam or American Street with the Indians, whatever area one wants to isolate, we can see situations where the culture is committing obvious atrocities, and has also built into it an amnesiac factor, a factor that allows it to forget. And the kind of theater that I am talking about, and we'll get to, I hope, today in all these notes, is a theater which allows us to deal with and analyze and reinvent ourselves. Not a theater that allows us to simply exist in an illusion. To simply distract us from the reality, but allows us in some way to imaginatively recreate it and understand it, so for ourselves and hopefully for this sort of the culture, we don't have to repeat the same failure. Now, interestingly enough, we all know, as we all read in Walter Kerr or Clive Barnes, that theater is not doing well. But one of the curious things in this decade is that the idea of theater, the concept of theater, has grown and expanded its bailiwick into much wider fields than ever before in our culture. Even though the actual number of performances of theaters, of plays, and as we'll talk about later, has declined. Now, it seems to me that, first of all, play and playing is a survival tactic. Anything that stimulates the imagination, allows us to grow, allows us to turn things upside down and see them fresh, is a way of renewing ourselves, and also a way of getting by, of really making sense out of certain things that seem oppressive. One of the things that's happened in the decade is that we've, mainly because of writing by such, really important writing, not sort of popular writing like Eric Burns' transactional analysis, but writing like Irving Goffman's The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, or The Feast of Fools by Harvey Cox, or E.T. Hall's Hidden Dimension. These kind of books have elaborated in scientific terms the facts which great playwrights have always known. That is, that people are very theatrical. And I think our language and how we talk about ourselves really betrays without us realizing how theatrical we really are. I made up a little sort of series of sentences here to show you what I mean. People who play it cool are sometimes accused of showing off. They are making a spectacle of themselves, exhibiting facade and image of style. We say they are playing a role. This is part of their emotional make-up. Sometimes they perform so well that we are not sure if they are for real. Their character might be a put-on. If they are too tired to make the effort, they are played out. But if they act up or act out their inner life to us, they are making a scene. We say, don't be so dramatic. If the person does this often, it's the same old routine. A number, a bit. He's throwing a show which is just done for effect. Now the point is, in that we see that in our lives, in ourselves, we are beginning to see and understand ourselves as theatrical beings, as people who do perform for one another, as you perform every day in every waking moment of your life, and understand that this performance is a way of dealing with the world, finessing the world, trying to hide yourself and yet find out about the world, which is exactly, of course, what theater is. A little game of slap and tickle, a little game of hide and seek. That's what it is. One of the interesting things in this decade has been that public scenes have taken over a large area of our theater and have become important to the culture. But they are, and I want to stress this, they are theater and they are meant to be theatrical in a special way. The first kind of public scene that I want to talk about is the scenes of the Barragans and also St. Francis of Assisi. These scenes are essentially scenes about spoiling the illusion of reality. I'd like to read you something that Bertolt Brecht said. There's a vast difference between somebody's having a picture of something which demands imagination and an illusion which demands gullibility. We need imagination for our purposes. We want not to create illusions, but to see that the audience, too, gets a picture of the matter at hand. So in other words, there's a difference between the illusion and a true picture of what's happening. Now, St. Francis of Assisi was one of the most interesting of the saints because he won his audience through theatrical exhibitions of faith. As I'm going to argue later that this is what theater and performance and clowning is about. But for instance, when it is recorded, he had eaten and drunk too much on Christmas. He had himself paraded through the streets with a rope around his neck, saying, "Behold the glutton." these kind of theatrical, there are many others, these kind of theatrical exhibits of his own situation dramatized the faith, dramatized his belief, and won adherence to it. It clarified a situation in much the same way that the Barragans in Maryland, the Catonsville Nine, burning draft cards in a situation which absolutely clarifies a moral position. What we have in a situation like that is somebody demonstrating spirit, and acting out a situation which reminds an audience like us who's seeing it what's happening out there, what the reality is, that people out there are dying, that people out there are enraged, and the only force that can stop this, obviously, since facts won't stop it, since we know the facts, and that doesn't stop the war, we know the tonnage dropped, we know the number of killed, that won't stop it. It's something much deeper and much more elusive and beautiful, because it's a moral force. And that is what they're performing. And Dan Barragan said, how do we help Americans get born, get going, get moving in a direction, recovering what the Greeks would call the true way? It seems to me that actors, with their moral passion and their bodily gestures, are in a certain place with regard to the spirit. They are creating and communicating light around their bodies, the light of the spirit of man. All right, now you're saying, what is he talking? He's going on about the Barragans. Well, I came here to listen to theater. We're going to get to that. But you have to understand that performance doesn't end on the proscenium stage. That performance, and the greatest performances of the greatest stars that you know are really life performances. And I mean, you really must understand that, because the idea is getting much larger. I mean, the theater, perhaps because as a critic, I got to write about something and I can't see it on the stage. I got to go look around outside. But I mean, we have to sort of consider much more, a much wider circumference. Now, I called those scenes, and you could say Abby Hoffman's. I know Abby Hoffman's scenes at the Chicago Convention, the Yippies. You could say that those were all scenes of spoiling the illusion. But there can be other scenes played on a public, and I don't have to go into that at too great a length. Suffice it to say that there are scenes of public illusion as opposed to scenes of public spoiling of the illusion. And a typical scene of illusion is practiced by that master in the White House. And here's a quote from Life magazine. Nixon's advance men this fall have carefully arranged with local police to allow enough dissenters into the staging areas so that the president will have his theme well illustrated as he warms to his job. He's playing the same game. He's performing, but his performance is to sustain an illusion, to sustain a lie, whereas the other performance, and I mean this dichotomy, which I'm trying to dramatize in life, is a dichotomy that also exists on stage. The other performance of the Barragans is simply an attempt to clarify, to elucidate, to exhibit spirit that is irresistible, that is so by its purity, by the total commitment of it, can't be denied, can't be wiped out. It's so pure, it's so fine, it's so undeniable that you're astonished and awed and, in a strange way, in love with it. Now, the same battle, as I said, that's happening in public performances is happening in private performances. And what I want to start talking about now is, which we have to discuss, is the myth of show business. Because this is certainly affecting what's happening to our theater. Let me give you a couple of facts here, which might interest you. In 1929 on Broadway, there were 231 shows. 1929. 1972, a much better fiscal year, there were under 30. The Broadway audience of this depleted commercial theater constitutes 80% of the total theater audience. 80% of the total theater audience going to 30 plays in New York. 80. 60% of this audience are 35 years of age or older, and only 11% are under 25. Now, that perhaps you could say to yourself, oh, all right, a young kid up there talking about he's wretched for the Village Voice. What he wants is nudity and a lot of violence, and that's it. No, not quite. Because the same thing that's happened to Broadway over the years, as I'll discuss in a few minutes, has happened to off-Broadway. We're talking about show business, and the theater in America has always been, the theater that we love, you know, the Cole Porter Theater, the theater of my father, that great theater has always, and those people who were outstanding outstanding performers, has always been a kind of archetype of capitalism. It's capitalism made fun. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, it's a micro business where it's like Monopoly. It's, you know, all the situations which happen in the business world happen bigger and glossier and happier. The whole Busby Berkeley world, you know, is all there. But off-Broadway, I mean, operates on the same financial system. Risk capital. People have to have investors. They have to get a return on their money. Blah, blah, blah. All right. Now, I only have figures these figures are provided by Actors Equity, perhaps the only union in the world that doesn't provide its members with a living wage. It's $74 a week for an actor. Now, off-Broadway is very interesting, and let me just remember, keep the idea of show business in mind, and emphasis on the business. In 1968-69, there were 74 shows, a lot more activity, off-Broadway. But the percent of total lost investment, after all, these shows can't get on unless they have investors who put up money who then get a return on their money. The percent of total lost investment in 68-69, a year which was the highest peak year for off-Broadway shows in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Total lost investment, 91.1%. 69-70, the year of Oh Calcutta's and the year of the dirtiest show in town. Yep. For the record, we didn't. The person at this podium didn't like them too much. 69-70, there were 68 shows. Total lost investment, 85.3%. Now, I don't have to tell you ladies that isn't good business. That isn't business at all. As a matter of fact, the idea of show business is in a sense a detriment to the problem of the theater, because it's always been associated with capitalism, making money and healthy, because the people that survive look very healthy. What you don't see is the dead men of the theater strewn by the wayside. What's the result of this financial disaster area? Well, we're starting to see that. In commercial conventional theater, we're starting to see what's happening. I mean, I'll tell you what's going to happen, and my prediction is coming true. When things cost as much as they do in your household, somebody says, either you or your husband, you got to cut back. You can't. You're spending too much money. We can't get in the black with that kind of return. So how does the theater cut back? Well, this is what depletes the theater. The theater cuts back in all the ways that the theater needs to expand. One set instead of 3. Small number of characters. When's the last time you went to a play with more than 6 characters or 7 characters? And less adventurous. After all, if you got to earn a living, you got to put something up there that the public is going to like, and they got to keep coming. So we can't do Mrozek. That would offend. Pinter, he's boring. Beckett, who can sit in there? Nothingness. What is that? So I mean, the point is, all the quality theater, the theater that sustains the life of the stage, has increasingly less areas to find an audience. Now you'll say, but we have the institutional theaters. Now, I don't want to go into this now, but I hope some of you will ask me about it later. We now see that Lincoln Center is on the slide. That will not open again. That will be a booking house. A booking house is that they'll book shows in, Sound of Music, they'll bring it. What? Yes, I don't think they'll get anybody. Well, we'll talk about that later. But the point is, the Beaumont's not the important stage there. The small stage is the important stage, because all the good plays and the new plays and the new writers aren't writing for us. You can't that stage on the. You could land a plane on the Beaumont stage, and most of the people who are writing for small spaces, because that's, of course, that they're writing to the economic needs of the theater. That's a bit of a digression. Anyway, what we see, and this is a fact. The fact is that theater is a handicraft industry in a technological society, and that's just where it's at. And so, what's happened often is that, and what we're seeing in the kind of theater that I enjoy, we're either seeing popular theater. For instance, you'll be reading next week, I hope, about Le Grand Magic Circus in Paris, which is an incredible theatrical experience, which has no national subsidy, but is so good and is so popular that it plays to 1,000 people a night and gives them a really good evening in the theater. That's one answer, popular theater. On the other hand, the other answer is what a lot of groups in New York have done, like Andre Gregory's Manhattan Project or Richard Schechner's The Performance Group. They have become their own producers. So the group it's like a commune. The group makes all the decisions, makes all the choices, and the profits, if there are any, are pushed back into the theater, not to investors, so that they can continue to work. This is the kind of theater that I'm interested in, because essentially what one has to do, since the economic structure of the society is killing it in many ways, that's another argument, one has to find other ways of outwitting the culture, and this is one way that the theater people have come up with. Anyway, to continue this about the myth of show business, the actor has been the supreme businessman. Now, the actor is the image. If the Broadway show business is, risk-taking, tax write-offs, bribery, ice, payoffs, if all the fun of capitalism in all its wide spectrum of greed is exhibited in microcosm in terms of the production, the actor is the supreme businessman, the guy or the woman who with pluck and luck, that old Protestant ethic going for him, like in Busby Berkeley. There's a great scene in 42nd Street when somebody breaks their leg and Ruby Keeler has to go on, and the director said, he trains her. The director says, "You going out there and you're coming back a star." Well, the whole thing. The actor embodies to the culture always and forever the central myth of the culture. That with pluck and luck, you can have money, acclaim, and the most important thing of all in a democracy, you can be elite. You are above criticism, above the people, and in fact, totally above any kind of democratic ideal. Now, with this in mind, I'd like to turn to the most successful, the form in which my father and so many others really made American theater, and in a sense, the archetypal American theatrical experience, which is the American musical. Why is it dying? It's a gigantic, spectacular form. It's certainly contributed more talent, and it's certainly more important than, say, the writing of it. Any musical comedy performer of the 30s or 20s, Buster, my father, or Bobby Clark, or innumerable sort of images, or Cole Porter or the Gershwins, any one of these people has provided an oeuvre of more importance and more, in a certain sense, depth than somebody like Edward Albee. And it has had an effect on an audience, especially because the musical is a kind of the first subliminal advertisement. You'll never remember the plots of a musical, but you'll never forget the words, right? And those words are reiterated and reiterated through your life. You just never forget them. You sing them to yourself. They make you feel good. They remind you of great moments and sad moments. But one is very emotional and sentimental about those words, and they are telling you something. They're not letting you go. What are they telling you? Why is the musical dying when the music is so good? And they're singing to you, like in Coco, Every franc in the bank is freedom. Or, like in West Side's Story, could it be? I'm sorry, I have to get this right because I never remember lyrics. Could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something good. If I can wait. I don't know what it is, but it's gonna be great. Anticipation, take it easy, don't rush things, don't rock the boat. Everything will come to you in time if you believe. You don't have to work for it. Or if you don't get excited. At the end of a storm, in the most evocative words, is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of the lark. And if you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? And what is that dream? That dream is what's on that stage. And what's on that stage? Wealth. The musical may be terrible, but it's big. What is the drama of a musical? How much it's capitalized at? What the star's getting paid? What it looks like? The people applaud the set. The set is a kitsch. I can't tell you the things. I don't know if you saw the Auschwitz ballet in a recent adaptation of Exodus on as a Broadway musical. I mean, it knows no bounds. The point is that these songs are selling a culture and a way of life which we see in life as betrayed. You can't sing about. You cannot sing about the benevolence of a society when you see everywhere in your own life, in the quality of life that you have to lead, in the quality of the leadership of the society, in the betrayal, the political betrayals that the society has managed on other cultures. You cannot believe in the goodness. You cannot believe in moderation. You cannot believe in any of those songs. So what are you going to sing about? What is there to sing about? There's no ring of faith. When the musical was great in the early 30s and the 20s, they believed in what they were singing about more. I mean, there was a sense they were writing about contemporary things. What does the musical now sing about? It never sings about the moment, because the moment is hideous. It sings about My Fair Lady, way in the past, right? It sings about all the big scores. It's the big. You'll see. It'll sing about money. That's what it sings about. It sings about money, and it's about money. The Rothschilds, the stories of show business people, which again reiterate, since their drama is the drama of capitalism, how they started low and rose high and own half the world. Well, that's what the drama is, and the point is that these no longer speak to the culture. They no longer have the thrill or the size, because if theater is a mirror of life, these things are no longer mirroring life. Okay. Now, the most important problem in comedy, in musical, is that somewhere in the 40s, the phrase comedy got dropped from musicals. They were originally musical comedies, and now they're musicals. It's an important distinction, because in the comedy was the playfulness, the joy, the kind of grit of reality, which makes theater exciting and dangerous. Once those things left the theater, the playfulness in these events started to diminish. Now, I'm going to talk about my father here, because he is, to me, the best performer that I have ever seen on the American stage. And also, he is a clown. And this is very important to understand a lot of the avant-garde stuff that's going on now. Although American theater, excuse me, you'll have plenty of chance to talk when I'm finished, if you wouldn't mind. American theater, when you read about Grotowski and Artaud and all these names that are thrown at you, you think, what is that? That's all very arcane and difficult. Well, American theater, in its height, provided the kind of quintessential clowns of this century. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, my father, the Marx Brothers. Okay, you don't have to say anymore. The whole world is feeding off the energy of those men to this day. Artaud wrote about the Marx Brothers, right? Every major poet has written about, Beckett writes about Keaton, has written things for Keaton. Chaplin has inspired Wallace Stevens. It goes on and on, Now, the thing about performers, and this is clowns, is a very important distinction to make that I have to make to you. Bobby Clark, Burt Lahr, no matter how, no, Jimmy Durante, any of those people, not Jimmy Durante, second rate, Keaton, you could put those people in drag, you could put those people in lions costumes, in animal, anything, they would always be themselves. They were always their being entirely. No matter what they were dressed up as, you always said, Bert, Bobby, Buster. You knew them, and their performance, and the glory of their performance was the fact that they were in the actions, in all their little funny nonsense sounds, in all their gestures, in all the sort of business that they had. It was a total expression of their being. The actor was not, as he is now on contemporary conventional stage, dead from the neck down. He could move, he could dance, he could juggle, he could sing, he could do all those things. And that is astonishing, and that is what theater is about. And that act of being yourself, as opposed to impersonating somebody, is an absolutely essential difference in the kind of aesthetic debate that's going on now. Let me give you an example. I have to go back a second. And one of the things that was exciting about that performance was that when you were in, as you know, if I was talking to students in Kansas, as I will be in a couple of months, I couldn't give them, in theater terms, the equivalent of the kind of energy that I'm talking about, which you've seen being New Yorkers and being older. If I were talking to them, I would have to say, it's like Tina Turner. It's like Janis Joplin. It's like Little Richard. And what that's about, and let me give you what Janis says about this. Janis says, I'm a strong believer in magic. I go to see Little Richard anywhere. I go to see Tina anywhere because they work. They happen. They're electric. They sweat for you. You not only feel that rhythm, you not only hear it, but you see it. And that's what that performing, that comic performing, that clowning was about. Magic, making things happen, that we're hearing sounds, seeing one of the Marx Brothers saying he's not going to jump on that chair. He is not going to jump on, he jumped on that chair. You know, the sense of things in the impossible happening, contortions, transformations, immediate, spontaneous, combustive, incredible kind of electricity. Well, to confront that energy is the first joy of theater. And it has a theme and a kind of humanity which is so much more meaningful than most literary statements. Maybe not more meaningful than Chekhov, but everything under Chekhov or Beckett or Pinter, much more meaningful than that, because it's a whole person. It's a person's struggle, and it's his joy, and it's his loneliness, and his own signature, as you have your own signature of movement and speech. Now, one of the dilemma that's facing the theater now, and which modern Grotowski and the Open Theater and Andre Gregory's Manhattan Project, all the new theaters things, the things that I like, are trying to demand of us as an audience the capacity to be astonished, to imagine things, to go into a situation not knowing what it's going to be like you come upon Burt Lahr or Keaton and you say, what's he going to do? I've got to follow him. I've really got to make this event with my own imagination. They ask you to discover and to imagine. Now, in a wonderful theater director called Meyerhold, wrote in 1910, The Dilemma That Faces Us. He argued that essentially what's happened to our culture, to the theater, is that it's become a theater of readers, that most of the plays one sees should be performed in libraries, since nobody moved, nobody did anything, and they could as easily be read as performed. And I ask you to consider the plays that you've seen recently. All Over, for instance, a serious play. Nothing happens. Nobody moves. There's the capacity to play, to have fun, to use the entire stage, the scenic, physical dimensions of the stage, totally unused. So the theater is operating at an amperage of 2 out of 100, or no, 20 out of 100. Now, Meyerhold wrote, in the contemporary theater, the comedian has been replaced by the educated reader. The play will be read in costume and makeup, might as well be the announcement on the playbills today. The new actor manages without the mask and the technique of the juggler. Play acting, that magic word of the theater, means nothing to him because as an imitator, remember the dichotomy I mentioned before, the difference between being and imitating. Because as an imitator, he's incapable of rising to the level of improvisation, which depends on infinite combinations and variations of all the tricks. Well, the point he's making is the point that he wanted performance, he wanted excitement, he wanted improvisation, where the audience was cast on the thrust of a sort of wave of excitement, where they had to be in the moment, actively involved with the performer to get what was happening. He wasn't, as you can now on a literary event, set your watch and say, well, in 10 minutes before the end, I'm going to get the theme of the play. Somebody's going to come out and say, well, I am lonely and I am afraid of death and dying. Well, I mean, what else is new? I mean, the point is that that in great performances which give you joy, the body, the instrument, is evoking and articulating all these things without saying them. And it's our ability to read that sign language, which is the thrill and excitement. My father, for instance, didn't come out and say what he meant. He didn't know what he meant, but he meant an awful lot to an awful lot of people. And it's the mystery involved in that, the search for it in people, the way you search out what you see in people. That's what the thrill of the theater is. Confronting human beings. More and more, as I mentioned in the very beginning the spiritual problem that the theater solves, and why it's so extraordinarily beautiful, is that more and more we are isolated. We are alone in our homes. The theater allows us a community, and the theater needs all of us, because without us as an audience, the laughs won't be there. Whereas the movie will go on without you. It's perfect. It's forever. The audience has to be good for that performer on that night. So it gets to be there's a much more sort of real chemistry being set up. Now, I'm coming to the last part. I'm afraid I'm going to, after this point, I'm going to have to open to discussion. And you will say, well, he hasn't talked about the new stuff. But I hope we'll do that in the discussion. But I want to say finally that if that represents the kind of clowning that my father represents, as one sees in Grotowski. Grotowski, for instance, who is the kind of prophet of the avant-garde, writing. Remember Bert Lahr and Buster Keaton, and then see that these words that he's saying, that Grotowski writes, really are the same thing, but just in very sort of intellectual idiom. He's talking about his kind of performer, and his performers act unnaturally. They're not realistic. You don't know what to expect when you go to the theater. You have to puzzle it out. They're not real. They talk in a language which is his own language, which is particular to that event. You have to figure it out. You have to work with them. You have to contribute your imagination to the event. Grotowski says, it is true that the actor accomplishes this act. He can only do so through an encounter with a spectator, intimately, visibly, not hiding behind a cameraman, wardrobe mistress, stage designer, or makeup girl, in direct confrontation with him. The actor's act, discarding half measures, revealing, opening up, emerging from himself as opposed to closing up, is an invitation to the spectator. This act could be compared to an act of the most deeply rooted, genuine love between two human beings. This is just a comparison, since we can only refer to the emergence from oneself through analogy. This act, paradoxical and borderline, we call a total act. In our opinion, it epitomizes the actor's deepest calling. What he's talking about is transformations. What he's talking about is the generosity of a performer, the idea of going to excess and going to extremes, which makes great theater. Where else can we go to extremes in our culture but in our fantasy world? And the theater must give us our fantasy world, and we must, at the same time, be prepared to accept it. One of the sad things about contemporary comedy is that, and again, it bears out my thesis, is that essentially, the clown has been reduced to a stand-up comedian. In other words, he doesn't move. He exists only from here. His total mechanism is his larynx and his face. That's 3/4 of his mechanism, his performing mechanism, dead, unarticulate. In the same way, the comedy, for instance, in other words, the body, the thrill of movement, the sense of the resilience and surprise of the body is sort of lost in contemporary comedy. And I'd like to just mention in this subject, say someone like Neil Simon, where the situation, what those plays are really about, is not energy, not renewal, but impotence and debasement, and a kind of incredible dread of the body. For instance, in Last of the Red Hot Lovers, which we can talk about this later, but I just want to make my point, and then we can debate it. Elaine, you've probably seen the play, but Elaine, the first play, I'll just recap. Barney Cashman, a restaurateur, wants to have an affair, and he has an affair. A girl walks in who's really hot to trot, and she comes in, and this is their conversation. Her name is Elaine. His name is Barney. I get cravings, she says. Barney says, you mean to eat? Elaine, to eat, to touch, to smell, to see, to do. A sensual physical pleasure that can only be satisfied at the moment. Barney, you mean like after a game of handball, a cold Pepsi? Very funny. A good joke, but in the nature of the joke, precisely the problem of the conventional theater. A fear of the body, an inarticulate, the inability of the body to express or convey emotion. Language, as in Simon, reduced to very banal, uninventive, but witty use of language that does not discover a new world, but simply sustains the illusions of an old one. Finally, it seems to me, and I hope we can get to this in our questions, that what theater is about is so simple and so hard to get. We have to be prepared to think fantastically, as Jung says. We have to be prepared to do that. We don't do it enough in our lives. That I don't mean we don't think big, but we don't think fantastically. We have to be able to tolerate fantasy and large dreams and different voices and different tones. Theater breaks us into this. It allows us to hear new language. It renews the language in ways that movies don't. As I'll tell, I mean, as you know from films, it's not the words that matter; it's the images. As you know, probably, for instance, in black, you haven't seen a black movie that talks about the truth. You've seen a lot of exploitation films. You haven't heard. I mean, you can't. The language is renewed by people speaking it in front of other people, hearing different tones, and on the whole, since movies are big commerce, they are made palatable. They are sort of homogenized to the lowest common denominator, and so we must be prepared to be astonished, and we must accept the fact that in our culture, one of the only places to find the sacred, both in ourselves and in a sense to define the future, one of the only rituals left to us in this way is the stage. Thank you very much. Now, if you want to ask questions, is that all right? Can I do that?
Please.
Okay. Let's have some questions because I'd like to talk about the new theater now with you, but I can't do it alone. Yeah. Speak up so everybody can hear.
I was hoping that you would speak about the Pax Theater and what your feeling is about what I consider its success.
Sure, I'll be glad to talk about that. First of all, it's very important to have people like Pap, who are essentially hustlers, street hustlers, tough guys who want something, who want to get it done, and who are willing at any price to get it done. I think the quality of Pap's productions almost uniformly has been terrible. It's very low quality. The problem is, and its excellence is the fact that it has a high turnover, that it provides a home for a great many writers and playwrights who otherwise would be lost out there. The quality is bad, but he is capitalizing. I mean, he feels a really great need, and he does it very well. I love Pap as a person. I think he's hilarious. He's a Ganef. He's a great Ganef, but he's a Ganef. I want to, what can I? I'll tell you a little story. The day after the Tony Awards, when he won the Tony Awards, we sit on a panel together on the Rockefeller Foundation, and he was there. He hadn't been to bed, and he came in, and of course all the foundation men we were early. We were sitting there. He was smoking a cigar at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the foundation people swooped in and they went right over to him and they said, "Oh, hello, congratulations!" And Pap turned around and said, "How's it feel to pick a winner?" That's him. And of course, what he wants and what he's trying to do is parlay the Pap Theater into a public theater. I mean, into a national theater. I'd like to make a distinction between a national theater and a popular theater, a people's theater. I think that he's doing a very good thing, and I have nothing. I mean, all power to him. But I think that the actual quality of the work, the intelligence of the plays chosen, Lincoln Center at the Forum, I have an axe to grind, has done much better plays in terms of actual content. Joe Papp has served a function, and it continues to serve a function very well. A people's theater is not the kind of bourgeois merde of what was the play? The war play, the anti-war play. Sticks and Bones, or indeed Championship Season, which is interesting. It makes a couple of good points, but it isn't. It's not Chekhov, and it's and a problem. And one of the problems, of course, that we have in our culture is that in order to get people to the theater, somebody like Clive Barnes has to say, because that's who we read, has to say, This is the new Molière, or this is the best. Well, and then you go and you say, this is not Molière, and so the next time you don't bite as easily, and so that hurts the theater ultimately. That kind of. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about Judith and Melina Beck?
Judith and.
Julian and whatever.
The Living Theater. I'm very interested in the Living Theater, and I feel very ambivalent toward them. And I'll tell you why. On the one hand, I respect their bravery, and I see them as and what they perform as a way of acting out a lot of the spiritual dilemmas of the culture. Talk about fantastic thinking. Talk about spiritual numbing. Talk about sort of despair and sort of suicidal despair. Nothing acted that out better than Paradise Now. It was horrible. It was offensive. It was mismanaged often. It was also beautiful. It was full of strange. It was so urgent, but that urgency, you see, is memorable because it crystallizes a problem in the culture. When I was there, people were fighting people, and you could see clear divisions in worldviews. That's exciting. It's an event. It's a happening, and I see them almost as interesting as sociological phenomena. And I think the suicidal aspect of my statement is borne out by the fact that since their performance, not only is the Living Theater at the moment not operating, but 3 or 4 of the people have died. You see? It's the desire, again, I would have gotten to this. One of the things that New Theater does exhibit, you heard me read about Grotowski talking about changing shape and transforming. Well, this impulse to change shape, this protean impulse to be many people and completely change, is a very contemporary thing. And this performing style, which we see in shows like Gregory's Alice in Wonderland or Grotowski, or in a sense, in what the Becks were trying to do, is an attempt to, maybe wrong-headed, but nonetheless real, to continually transform yourself, to continually be changing and evolving, which is a spiritual thing, which is a spiritual quest, which is very particular in its intensity and its violence to this moment, I also think that they're interesting because of their nostalgia I think that they're, you could say that No Nanette was nostalgic in a kind of silly way. But they are nostalgic in a kind of profound way, in the sense that they're nostalgic for a kind of primitive society, a kind of primitive Eden, which can never be. And that dichotomy in our society, which we see all around us, is a very real one. But they are brave and they are activists and they make you think, and you can't come away, even if you. I never stayed to the end of one of their shows, but I never forgot one. I can tell. I don't know much else about. I can't remember many things I see. Yes, ma'am.
Curious thing is, I have 2 pre-teenage boys, and we enjoy taking them to the theater, at musicals or straight plays or Shakespeare or you name it. And
right.
They are not turned on by the theater, and they are not particularly interested in it. It doesn't matter if it's from No Nanette to the Gondoliers or Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, they sort of like. They sort of dug that. But they're not interested in the theater's art form. And I see this among their friends.
Well, yes, I think it's interesting. Well, one of the, can I,
I was their age, terribly, the theater.
but let me, I mean, it's understandable that they're not interested in the theater. Excuse me, in order for me to answer a question, you'll have to be quiet, and then we can talk more, because I'd like to do that. One of the reasons why young people aren't interested in the theater is that things don't happen fast enough. They used to. Things were pretty fast when the Marx Brothers were on stage, when my father was on stage. I mean, it was very, very fast, and you got a point, you got on, you got off. There wasn't a whole lot of messing around. There was no psychological realism that you had to, you got the point. We know so much about war, about death, about destruction, about poverty. We know how it works. We don't really know what poverty is about, but we know it as far as we're going to know it. And the problem is that images don't come fast enough. And when you get an event like Orlando Furioso, which was the greatest, next to my father's, the greatest time in the theater I've ever had, kids flip out. It's better than Fellini because you have infinite choice. You can move around. It's physical. You're dealing with people. You're helping people. You're in danger because platforms are moving around and you're excited. Then it's an event and they see the theater for what it is, which is a kind of thrilling happening whether you can expect the unexpected. And that is what, so when you have psychological realism, because we have a kind of ersatz, a Freudian vocabulary anyway, you know, he hates his father in the first act, he's going to kill him in the second, I mean, that kind of thing, yes.
You talk about a return to, richness of language, imagery, etc.
Yeah.
The opposite side of the coin being an over-cerebral approach. I'm thinking of a few plays that I've kind of fallen asleep at, one of them being The Homecoming, which...
That's your fault, my dear.
Well, that's true. Now, I'm just wondering, other circumstance, another play that was, from the first 5 minutes, was absolutely predictable was Championship Season,
yeah.
Which...
Yes, well, I mean, let me talk to the point of language. The thing is, what happened? This relates to the previous point. Let me just mention that point again because I realize I forgot to say it. When people who are so starved for images finally see something, they don't know how to cope with it. I mean, the critical response to Orlando Furioso was terrible, but these people don't think of theater as a visual, physical event. They don't have any idea of what performing is about because they read books about the theater and then they do it and then they write about it. I mean, they don't know that. In the same way, you hear Walter Kerr every week. He writes about language, right? When you get playwrights who can use language, like Samuel Beckett, Walter Kerr says in 1956, Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot is an intellectual fruit bowl. Okay, last year he proclaimed it a masterpiece. But I mean, when you get people who are experimenting with language, very often the very people, the critics who are calling for a new use of language, aren't receptive to what language is. They don't really think about it, you see?
Well, I went home and read the play, The Homecoming.
And then you saw.
And then, right. Now, maybe I should have done it the opposite way around.
It varies, but you see, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, an evening at the theater, you want something physical, possibly. I mean, you're talking about your father and Bobby Clark and the people who moved in the Marx Brothers. Does one in a Pinter play like this? Is your advice read the play first?
No. Go to the play. I mean, you can do either. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Usually, it's better to go to the play.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, what I mean to say about language is, for instance, if you go to black theater, you have a kind of language. You just have a kind of energy, a kind of thrill. I mean, the misuse of language is wonderful. People who speak the King's English, you always tell your kids to say, don't say that, say this. Speak good English. Well, as a writer, good English is the death of writing. I mean, whatever expresses yourself is good. And what you have is kind of incredibly crude, beautiful. I left in England. I was going to read you a absolutely wonderful monologue in a play called Five on the Black Hand Side, where the guy, a pimp called Fun Loving comes on the stage, and he does a whole riff about... I'm the ass kicker, the titty licker, and it goes on like that. And at the end, he says, I ain't giving up nothing but bubble gum and hard times. And I mean, that kind of surprise in language, that kind of energy is, I mean, you don't need, in other words, he doesn't move around saying, I ain't giving up nothing, but, I mean, he doesn't run around, you've got to stand still and deliver the line, but the language itself is so full of energy and is dancing in its own way, as Pinter's is, or as Orton's is, or as John Noonan's is, American writer, or Sam Shepard, or John Guare. It's doing its own little acrobatic verbally. You don't need it because your mind is working and you're startled and you're surprised and astonished, which in linguistically, that's what's happening. You had a question?
Yes, what is your opinion of the American Place Theater?
I like the American Play, in a sense. I think it's done some very good things. I think it's based on a false premise. I think it's hard to make dramatists out of people who don't necessarily want to be dramatists. I mean, to take Robert Lowell and make him write a play might be art, maybe. I don't think the particular plays were, but I mean, it's a difficult thing. I think that they do a good job, but so many of these institutional theaters, there's nothing wrong with the theaters at all. It's simply the taste of the management. So I mean, in other words, I don't particularly like the taste of the management, but I like the taste of, say, Chelsea. I like some of the things. For instance, they did a play. I wasn't here for it, but I saw that it got bad reviews, called The Kid by Robert Coover. Now, Robert Coover is one of the very best writers in America. The very fact that they gave him a theatrical experience with a good director is wonderful. The fact that they support people like Charles DeZenzo, or Ron Ribman, who are excellent writers, absolutely admirable. So much of what one likes and doesn't like in the theater is, it's all teamwork. And some team, it's like picking your baseball team. You might like the way the Giants play and not the way the Yankees play, and some people actually do play better. I don't think that at the moment the American Place functions as excitingly as it did in the beginning.
I don't think any of them do, really. And I feel that some of the works that I've seen, and I don't think I'm stupid, I feel as though I'm in a foreign country. I simply do not understand what they're talking about.
Now, what plays did you have in mind?
I can't name any at the moment, but some of the stuff that I've seen down at the Public Theater and some of the stuff that I've seen even at the Forum,
Yeah.
which I think is one of the best ones.
Yes, I'm glad you said that.
And at the American Place Theater, I simply don't understand what they're talking
Well, I mean,
what they're trying to give us.
but you see, that's part of. I mean, you see, what I was.
It's too experimental.
Well, they're not. You see, they're dealing with words. I mean, they're not ripping their clothes off and asking you to come down and cannibalize them or something. I mean, they're dealing with words. They're dealing with images, and part of the thing. I mean, it's true that you have to trust the institutions that give you these plays. Now, it may be that they betray your trust at a certain point, but they are dealing with words and they are dealing with concepts. And if you don't understand, you should be puzzled. But the puzzlement shouldn't allow you to simply cut off, but to say, well, I'd like to read that. If you were puzzled by a play at the American Place, and you wrote to Win Hammond and said, I'd like to see a script of that play, you'd get it. And you could think about it. And the point of after all, theater is a debate, and it's not a debate that's supposed to end when the curtain comes down. You should, I mean, the point is to continue thinking. I mean, I feel very allied to the theater because it's essentially given me my entire education. Because it's through being, by seeing The Homecoming or hearing an Orton play or seeing an Orton play, I mean, you think, wow, that's incredible. I've got to find out more about that. What does it mean? I got a puzzle. I don't quite understand it. Is no, net.
I mean, in the Homecoming, at least you can understand.
Yeah, so I imagine that if you'd have read Alice in Wonderland in 1878 or whatever, you would have thought, what is this about? This is crazy.
It's an age bracket.
No, it's not age. Everybody's as hip as everybody else.
The group today that goes to theater, being older, and have set ideas of what theater is.
Yeah, that's true.
Very beginning of,
That's true.
that for what can they use? And they come into it, and they don't seem to grow up with these things of today.
Right. Well, but part of the thing is to continually change and continue, and that's what yeah.
Don't you think it's pathetic that most of the plays today come from some form of play?
Excuse me?
Floyd,
On Broadway.
on Broadway, the Kurt Weill, well, that's off Broadway. Oh, Coward. All of these things are taken from something else, much ado about nothing.
Well, I mean,
The theater to me seems dead. There are so few
You see,
original plays.
well, you see, I think that's, on the one hand, I think the real sense of decadence is when you see a play made from a movie rather than a play made from a play. I mean, in other words, if I go to see The Apartment made into a play, I think, well, what do I mean, that's the wrong way around. It used to be that the plays were the subjects for the films. And now the thing is reversed, which indicates the shift in the balance from theater to film. I don't think anything that'll give you a good evening, whether you look at Shakespeare, took the Holland's Head Chronicles and anything that was around and whipped it together in a stew and served it up. If it pleases an audience, if it gives you an idea and a good time, and by good time I mean a sense of yourself, it makes you feel emotions that you don't in the spectrum of your ordinary day have enough time to feel. That's good. I agree with you in the sense that I don't think it's a sign of decadence.
They can't write a new play, but they have to go to Shakespeare.
Well, I think I think that's a bad point because Shakespeare is worth seeing every year.
I know, but there are very few original plays today.
That's true.
You said there are only 30 shows on the board.
Yeah, there are lots of original plays. One of the problems is that most producers have no guts, and most institutional theaters have no guts. I hate to tell you the plays that all our, at the moment, cultural heroes have turned down. The really important playwrights, Pap hasn't done. Yeah.
Don't you think that the drama critics have hurt the theater? For instance, when Jacques Brel came out 6 years ago, it was damned and it ran for 6 years. The Miller play, the creation and other things. I mean, before you went to it, they said it was bad.
Well, let me.
I loved it.
Well, okay. Now let me talk to this because I think that you probably feel very close to the question of critics since you all have to buy tickets and you all read these people and then you go and you find that you're disappointed. First of all, I'd like to say it's caveat emptor. If you think that Clive Barnes knows something about theater, and you go to the theater and you're upset because what you see isn't too good, then it's your fault. Well, I mean, you've got to find it. Then you're talking about the critic as you see the problem. You have to be quiet because if you don't, I can't. The critic, as it's been constituted in this culture, is a kind of is market research. I mean, in other words, you just want to read him to find out whether you are going to lay out your money or not. Now, as far as, I think this is ridiculous criticism, but let me tell you that one of the reasons why this is perpetuated, and it perpetuates an incredibly fatuous system, is not because of the critics, because I think the critics, I'm sure if you had another guy in here, they'd say, Lahr, that jerk. And I have not very much respect for, especially the daily critics. The problem is that the institutions, the Times mainly, will not change. It's their fault. There is no reason why a critic has to see a play and write about it the same day. There's no reason why he has to write every day. You cannot have, as a critic, and I'm here to tell you because I've been doing it for about 7 years, you cannot have 365 new opinions. You just can't. You can't do it. You can't write. And if you continue to write, you become a shell of a man. You have to think. You have to relate. What criticism is much more than simply telling you what happened and whether you should go or not. That's not criticism. That's shilling. That is not what it's about. I absolutely, and there are lots of critics. I'm not myself alone, but I mean, critics like Robert Brustein or Richard Gilman, I know is here. They all, and myself too, refuse to write about a play just as a play. I want to relate it to the world. I don't care if you go to see it or not. I want to tell you what I thought about it and how it moved me. If that impresses you enough to go, fine. If it doesn't, okay. Criticism isn't about catering to your needs. That's something else. That's public relations, something like that. Yes, ma'am. He lasted a year, and that was long enough. He was bad as a drama critic. He's a wonderful film critic and a smart man, but I mean, he just didn't love the theater. I mean, his argument with most theaters was that it wasn't film. Yeah, that's also, my wife points out that another reason why there was so much pressure put on him because he didn't like enough. He was discriminating. But in that position, which again is created by the Times because they want their man to be the man read that sells papers, it was an untenable situation. He couldn't be true to himself. And yet to be true to himself as a writer, which one must be, he couldn't please enough people. You see, and unless people read up, if you like a play and you're the critic of the Times, unless you overkill with adjectives, you can't get anybody out of their seat. Why? I mean, and on the whole, when I look at I'm coming home in the plane a couple of days ago, I looked at the New Yorker to see what was on, And except for one play, which clearly was a play for the theater, that used the theater, called Dr. Salavi's Magic. Which I mean, I know the guy who does the music.
Did you see?
I know I've heard the music.
No, but have you seen?
Not yet.
We have seen it.
Well, anyway, let me just say.
It's an experience.
Well, all right. But if it's an experience, it's better than 9/10 of the other things, which are simply you say, well, that's a situation. Why? One of the things about new theater is that it's defining what theater is that TV and films aren't. That may be a small terrain, but it isn't such a small terrain. It's a real big terrain with human people and human images and sound and sights and spectacle that you can't see on television. But so much of the things, again, because commercial theater operates on the profit motive, and profit is a function of repetition, you have to continually give people back what they see. So it kills the theater, because why go to see a Neil Simon play when you can watch I Love Lucy? I mean, do you see what I mean? I mean, because the situation is essentially it's better than I Love Lucy, but it's the same operative structure. Yes, ma'am.
Could you,
No, excuse me. I was just saying. Go ahead. I mean, there's a lady in the front.
okay. Could you give us the names of some of the new innovative small theaters that are open to the public or to which we could have membership?
Yes. The best three that I know of are Andre Gregory's Manhattan Project, which has done Alice in Wonderland, which had great success, and is going to do Endgame by Samuel Beckett in a sort of new concept. Richard Schechner's The Performance Group, which is in Worcester Garage. They did Dionysus in '69, a long time ago. Also, Joe Chaikin's The Open Theater. You have to watch for that one on The Voice. They are ensembles that perform together, as opposed to they sometimes if they work on a play, they work on it with an author, but it's not simply the author's creation; it's the creation of the actors and the author. As a consequence, of course, it takes much longer for a play to gestate than it would if an author said, "Here, you do this, you move here, you do that." Excuse me, there's a lady in the back.
Tony, you had a question?
All right. Yes, ma'am.
This.
Discuss the repertoire the theater of the night has failed, as you seem to feel that's not going to.
Well, I don't think it will open again, and I don't think it's the fault of the management particularly.
Irving's theater.
Jules Irving's Lincoln Center Repertory Theater. I think that it's on part one of the problems in America. It first started with the building of schools, because they built schools in every town in order to attract people to the town, to sort of populate the wilderness. And one of the things that cultures do now in the 20th century, in order to populate their sort of urban wilderness, is to build theaters to attract, in like the Guthrie where I worked. You build a theater that attracts tourists, that attracts people to Minneapolis, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the problems that you see with the Lincoln Center as an institution is that it has a building, and that building eats money. It costs to police Lincoln Center, the entire complex, of which Beaumont would have to chip in a good percentage. It costs them $500,000 a year to police it. It costs $25,000 just to keep the fountain running. The costs are inordinately high. Just to do a play at the Forum, which lasts 3 weeks, it costs $60,000. So you see that the cost, the contracts that were negotiated, the costs of the productions, the fact that the board, you can't raise and expect to raise that kind of money every year for the theater. Without it's a great deal of waste in proportion to the actual energy that's coming out of the institution. I personally think the Forum is excellent and has always been excellent. And although I've been responsible for a couple of Lincoln Center's, one of Lincoln Center's biggest hits, in the sense that I got in the play, which was Enemies, and one of its biggest disasters, which was Operation Sidewinder, which I still maintain is a great play, but which lost us 10,000 subscribers. The fact is that I think that Jules has done a rather good job, especially downstairs. But I think that no person, whoever goes in there, remember Jules, for instance, in San Francisco was a star, and it's just when you get transformed to this place, the place changes you. You can't change the place. So no matter who they bring in, Gordon Davidson, all these people are good. Gordon Davidson or Arvin Brown, they're very honorable people, as is Jules, and they have their own team and they'll put on shows for you. The problem is that stage was designed. For instance, that stage is an architectural disaster. That was designed by Joe Melzina, right? Half the stage, when it was built, was inoperable because the sight lines were wrong. So in other words, there's what you see when you see a play there is half of what the stage house is. And it was just designed badly. You could have a car park behind there. You could have another theater behind there. It's so big. I mean, it's very hard to act and be in that space, you know? It's a problem.
I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Well, it was I enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.